Hello, and welcome to Books versus Movies, the podcast where I try to answer the age-old question, is the book really always better than the movie? I'm Yuvia, an actress and book lover based out of New York City, and today we will be discussing I Know This Much Is True by Wally Lamb and its 2020 miniseries adaptation, I Know This Much Is True, starring Mark Ruffalo. Hi, everyone. Yes, so today's episode is a special episode of Books versus Miniseries. And before we get started on the episode, I have something really excited headed your way. And I'm not going to announce it officially yet. I'm going to wait until the release of the next batch of episodes. So I'm still not really sure if I want to have seasons. I know some podcasts do seasons. A lot of the podcasts I like don't do seasons. They just record and release. Yeah, I honestly don't know if it makes sense to do that because it does take quite a bit of time to read everything and watch everything and analyze everything. So, I started working on this podcast at the beginning of the year. So it's taken me about a year to do everything just to get like the first batch of episodes ready to upload and everything. But I don't know. I don't think there's anything wrong with seasons, obviously. I just don't know that that's how I want to handle the podcast, but that remains to be seen. But because of this very exciting announcement that's coming your way in the new year, in the new year. This will be released in 2024, and I don't know when. I'm just going to say New Year because that's when I'm recording it. So yes, I'm very excited for the news headed your way. You are going to notice a big difference in the audio quality, which I'm excited about. But like I said, you're going to have to wait until the new season of Books versus Movies. I'm going to call it a season for now because this is definitely going to be the official season 1 ending because this is the last time my audio quality is going to sound like this, which I'm really excited about. So yes, this is the official end of season 1. And then at the end of season 1, we'll see if this is the only season. And then from then on, it's just record release as the episodes are ready, or if there will be actual episodes. But yeah, I know that was quite a bit of a ramble, but I'm really excited. So yes. And one more thing, I'm going to start a new segment called El Paso Shout Out. So if you don't know, I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas, and I have a lot of pride for my hometown. I love my hometown dearly. And I get I get really excited when El Paso is mentioned or it's featured because that doesn't happen very often. So, we got to give the El Paso shout out when it happens. So today's El Paso shout out comes from Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, which is just something I'm reading for fun. At this time, there's no adaptation for this book, but I wanted to share it. So this is what it says. He cut his hair in Plano, hacking off inches in a truck stop bathroom with a stolen hunting knife. Outside of Abilene, he bought a blue Madras shirt and a leather belt with a silver stallion buckle. The shirt he still wore, the buckle he'd pawned in El Paso when he ran out of money, but mentioned wistfully, still feeling its weight hanging at his waist. In Socorro, he began wrapping his chest in a white bandage, and by Las Cruces, he'd learned to walk again, legs wide, shoulders square. He told himself that it was safer to hitchhike this way. But the truth was that he'd always been Reese. By Tucson, it was Therese who felt like a costume. How real was a person if you could shed her in 1,000 miles? So that was our El Paso shout out from The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. Sorry, Britt. Just a really quick thing that I noticed as I was reading it though. Depending on which Socorro Britt is talking about. So there's Socorro, Texas, which is a suburb of El Paso, I guess you would say. Officially, unofficially. It's also like it's its own little town, but it's such a part of El Paso that a lot of people just say they're from El Paso even though they live in Socorro. Unless you're in El Paso, then you say you're from Socorro. Minor nitpick that I noticed is, so Reese is traveling from El Dorado, Arkansas to Los Angeles, California. And so that means that he is traveling from east to west, in which case the order of these cities are a little bit off. So he pawns his buckle in El Paso, and then when he gets to Socorro, he begins wrapping his chest, and by the time he gets to Las Cruces, he's learned how to walk. The thing is, if you're traveling from east to west. Traveling that way, it does come before El Paso. So it's like Socorro, and then you drive past it and you're in El Paso proper. So it wouldn't make sense for El Paso to come before Socorro, unless Britt is talking about Socorro, New Mexico. But in that case, Reese would hit Las Cruces before he hit Socorro. So the order would either need to be Socorro, El Paso, Las Cruces, or it would be El Paso, Las Cruces, Socorro. Just a very, very minor nitpick that I noticed since I'm from that area. But otherwise, thank you, Britt Bennett, for that El Paso shout out. Very small, but as soon as El Paso is written on a page and immediately I notice it. So before I even got to that paragraph, I was like, El Paso's mentioned. So I got really excited. Okay, so that was the end of today's El Paso segment shout out. Obviously, I'm not going to have these segments every single episode because El Paso, like I said, is not mentioned very often. But let's get into the episode proper. I Know This Much Is True by Wally Lamb was originally published in 1998, and it was, from what I understand, the rights for it were purchased pretty immediately, but nothing ever came of it. It was shopped around. Eventually, Mark Ruffalo found it, fell in love with the book, wanted to adapt it, and even then it was in kind of adaptation heck for a while before it made its way to our screens officially in 2020. So this is, I'm actually going to read like a little blurb summary to kind of draw you in, because I will say the book and the miniseries are both very good at drawing you in from the start. So here's what it says. On the afternoon of October 12th, 1990, my twin brother Thomas entered the Three Rivers, Connecticut Public Library, retreated to one of the rear study corrals, and prayed to God the sacrifice he was about to commit would be deemed acceptable. So yes, I Know This Much Is True by Wally Lamb is about a lot of things. It's about love, forgiveness, redemption, curses, and it's about a lot of things, and it's a really beautiful story. The 2020 adaptation stars Mark Ruffalo, and it follows the lives of identical twins Dominic and Thomas Birdsey, I don't know why I said it like that, Dominic and Thomas Birdsey, in a story that also covers betrayal, forgiveness, love, and all sorts of delicious topics. So let's go ahead and get started. Yeah, as I hope from that little blurb I read, you think that this is really interesting, and it is. It's wild. It has a very wild introduction. So the book and the miniseries both start with Thomas Birdsey in the library chopping his hand off as a sacrifice so that the desert war can end. Desert storm, not desert war. So yeah, it's a very wild beginning. And I remember I started reading this book in my book club. Shout out to my virtual book club friends if you're listening. I love you all. But yes, so I remember I was describing what happened, and Raymond, who was the one hosting it that day, was just like, Raymond has the best reactions to stories or descriptions, and his face is just like mind blown because of how wild this was. Because like I said, this is the introduction. I'm not giving anything away. This is part of the setup as you're reading it. And he was like, wow, all right, that's quite the introduction. Yes, it is. So that's how they both begin. The mini series is pretty faithful to the book. The biggest change we'll talk about as it comes toward the end, but otherwise in the ways in which it was changed, it was things being left out. A lot of things left out, and I mean a lot of things. This is a behemoth of a book. This book is nearly 900 pages. It is humongous. And the miniseries, being a miniseries, obviously could have left every single thing in, but it didn't. And I'm very glad that it didn't. It focused on the most important things. And yeah, the biggest changes, or the biggest change, is involving Joy, who is Dominic's much younger girlfriend, played by Imogen Poots in the miniseries. So yes, like I said, this is a huge, huge book, and the miniseries left a lot out. And I'm glad that it did. because as much as I enjoyed the book, I feel like it definitely could have used an editor. I don't feel like this book needed to be almost 900 pages. You easily could have cut out the parts of the book that were left in the miniseries, and it would have cut it down at least to half of what it is, and that would have been enough. There was so much backstory that I feel like it ultimately ended up hindering the book. Like, it really slowed down the pacing. It just got to a point where I was like, I understand enough of these characters' backstories. I don't need any more than this. And I mean, yeah, so let's get into it. So yeah, the miniseries, both the book and the miniseries flash back in time. So the main events happen in 1990, and it flashes back to the twins' childhood and their adolescent years, their college years, and then really a little bit of the adult years and like the early adult years, like early 20s, mid 20s. And then from there, the rest of the book focuses on the now. They just turned 40, or they're about to turn 40, I should say. Yeah, so the biggest thing that I'm really glad that they took out of the miniseries, because it was just not fleshed out. And again, this is like almost a 900-page book. Like, this is something that you could have fleshed out or just removed completely, because ultimately it added nothing to the story other than shock value, maybe. So this is when Dominic and Thomas are in their early 20s. They're both in college. Dominic has started dating Dessa, who is the love of his life. They get married and end up divorced after their baby dies of SIDS, and they get divorced, and then many years later he ends up with Joy, his much younger girlfriend, but he still very much loves Dessa. So at this point in the book, he is with Dessa. They've been dating for a while. He goes to visit her at work. He had a fight with someone else, and he goes to her looking for comfort. She's working. He feels like she's kind of rude to him, but she's like, I wasn't being rude to you. I can't give you the attention you need because I'm working. So he goes and waits for her in her car, and he falls asleep. And when she gets out of work, she goes and meets him. She gets in the car. He really wants to have sex with her. She says no, but he really wants to have sex with her. She continues to say no. So you can kind of guess what happens next. This was not in the miniseries, and I'm glad it was not in the miniseries, because that obvious, he sexually assaults his girlfriend, and there's really no consequence to it. Like, she says, like, you did this to me. She uses the actual word. Says, you did this to me. And she kicks him out of her car. She drives away, and then he walks home. And as he's walking home, he realizes, oh crap, I left my bike in the trunk of her car. But she doesn't talk to him for several days. And then one day, out of the blue, she calls him up and says, do you want your bike back? And they resume as normal, as if this huge traumatizing thing just didn't happen between the two of them. And don't get me wrong, like, people process trauma differently, I understand, but there's no indication whatsoever that she looked for therapy and got the help she needed to, like, overcome this. Like, nothing. It's just, oh, I love him, so I'm forgiving him. And that just really bugged me, because it doesn't work like that. Whatever. This is, yes, it's just very frustrating for me that, like, this happened. And then the story continues as if he never did this to her. They go on to get married, and they're happily married until they lose their daughter. But there's no consequence. There's no indication that this affected her. It was just really frustrating for me as a reader to read this and just have this brushed off, like, no big deal. I love him, so I forgive him and everything's okay. So that was just really frustrating for me, and I'm glad they didn't include that. Instead, the miniseries during this time, you see the love and nothing but the love, and the miniseries doesn't focus too much on this time in their lives. It focuses more, Dessa is introduced and you see that they're together, how they meet, and then it kind of flash forwards to them being officially together and you see how much they love each other. But in the miniseries, so Dessa is obviously a very important character to Dominic, and it's important that they showed how they, that aspect of the relationship. But the primary focus on the miniseries during this time in their lives is Thomas's struggle through college. So Thomas is schizophrenic, and during this time is when he starts showing the signs that he is schizophrenic. When he was younger, there was like no indication or anything like that. It wasn't until he was in his 20s that the schizophrenic episodes started occurring. And so we get a glimpse of how it started affecting his school. He ends up having to drop out, all this stuff. The other thing that, like I said, we get a lot of unnecessary backstory, I feel like, in the book. So we have the summer in between their freshman and sophomore year of college, in which they get a job at they just get like a job working at the cemetery, and they're working with a guy named Ralph Drinkwater, who is half Black, half Native American. So there is a lot of, obviously, that he faces a lot of racism, and we see the bond, like Ralph is kind of distant with them at first, and then they start smoking pot together, and then one day they get caught with the pot, and they all put the blame, Dominic and his best friend Leo put the blame on Ralph and say, this is all his. We get some more of a backstory to Ralph. In the miniseries, he is present more because he works at the mental hospital that Thomas is sent to. He's a janitor there. And so I will say he is a little bit more fleshed out in the book than he is in the series. The series definitely, the main focus is Thomas and Dominic. So considering that all right, here comes your first spoiler. Spoiler, turn back now if you don't want to hear the spoiler. So it turns out that, Dominic and Thomas don't know who their father is. They were adopted at the age of 6 months, if I'm not mistaken, by Ray Birdsey, their stepfather. And so that's the only father figure they've known all their lives. But because Dominic knows that Ray is not his biological father, I should say, because he knows that Ray is not his biological father, he has a lot of conflicting, I want to know who my real father is. And it turns out that they are actually Ralph Drinkwater's cousins. His uncle is his uncle who was killed in Vietnam is their father. This is something that Ralph knows, but it is not something that Dominic and Thomas know. Ralph does tell Thomas we're cousins, and Thomas mentions this to Dominic, but Dominic just thinks that this is Thomas going through one of his schizophrenic episodes, and it's like, okay, yeah, Thomas, whatever. So I do see why there was a lot more backstory to Ralph in the book than there ended up being in the miniseries. I do wish there was a little bit more of that, just to make Ralph the three-dimensional character that he deserves to be. But yeah, so that was definitely something I do wish they had kept a little bit more of that backstory in the miniseries. So yeah, that one I understand a little bit more as to all the backstory. That being said, there are a lot. This book tries to handle so many topics, and it ends up, it tries to handle so much. And even in 900 pages, it's like, I feel like this was brought in just because that's what was trending at the time this was written and published, but not because it necessarily moves the story forward, I guess. Ralph at one point tells Dominic to get Thomas tested for HIV. Turns out there's like a cover-up in which one of the attending nurses was sexually assaulting the patients at this mental hospital, and Ralph isn't sure if Thomas was one of them or not. So he tells Dominic to get Thomas tested. This is also included in the miniseries, though it's more of like hinted that there's an epidemic outbreak at the mental hospital, but there's not necessarily someone like sexually assaulting the patients. It's more of like, there's blood transfusions and and just people are not taking care of the patients here the way they should be treated. So get them tested. So yeah, there's things like that. So we're getting into the big change. So here's your next spoiler alert, mainly for the book, because this does not happen in the series. So Joy, again, this is Dominic's much younger girlfriend, reveals to him that she is pregnant. And it is revealed in both the book and the miniseries that he cannot be the father. He impulsively got a vasectomy after the birth of his daughter. And not after the birth of his daughter, after the death of his daughter. His daughter dies of SIDS at 3 weeks old. And so Dessa's way of coping is by going on a long vacation. And while she's on vacation, Dominic decides, I'm not putting us through that again. I'm getting a vasectomy. So when Dessa comes back and she sleeps with him for the first time and he reveals this to her, that's kind of the last straw. She is very much one of those people that wants to go to all the support groups and talk about what happened. And he's very like closed off, like, nope, I'm not. I'm gonna hide what I'm feeling. I'm gonna keep it all in. So that puts a strain on their marriage. When she comes back and he reveals this to her, that's the last straw. That's what leads her to separate from him and ultimately divorce him, because she realizes on this vacation that as much as it hurt to lose her daughter, she wants to try to have another kid again. And obviously that cannot happen now that Dominic has had this vasectomy. So when Joy reveals that she's pregnant in the miniseries, both the miniseries and the book, he works as a painter. He paints houses. So he's working at a client's house when he ends up falling 3 stories and breaks his leg, and he gets knocked unconscious. He's in a lot of pain. So the morphine keeps him knocked cold. So when he finally comes to, this is when he tells Joy, I know that baby's not mine. I had a vasectomy. And in the miniseries, Joy is like, no, this is yours. What are you talking about? Like, of course this is your kid. And he's like, no, it's not. I had a vasectomy. And then, she kind of just stands in shock. And the nurse closes the curtain to change one of his bandages. Then when she opens the curtain again, Joy is gone. And that is the last we see of her. This is not the last we see of her in the book. In the book, she does leave the hospital, but her best friend shows up and says, listen to this. And it's a recording in which she tells him the whole truth and nothing but the truth, which is that her best friend is actually her uncle and that she's been having an incestuous relationship with since she was a teenager, and that he's actually the father of the kid. And she just hoped that Dominic was the real father. She figured out that obviously that cannot be. So she apologizes for cheating on him with her uncle, and she says they're moving to California. And then they move to California, and then several months pass. At this point, the baby's born, and she says, I want you to meet the baby. He's like, why do you want me to meet the baby? This is a little weird. So whatever, he says, sure. And he invites her over. He meets Tiffany, that's the baby. And then she leaves. And then he finds another note because Joy cannot express herself face to face, which I can relate. But she leaves a note saying, hey, so it turns out that my uncle, my best friend uncle, also likes to have sex with men, and he has AIDS, and I don't know if I have it yet. So I just want to know that if I do have it and I die from it, can you adopt Tiffany? And so he's like, what? So, sorry, I'm just imagining, if Raymond is listening to this, I'm imagining Raymond's face right now. So, yes. Yeah, so that happens. And he ultimately, 6 years pass or something. Like, he and Dessa end up getting back together. They adopt Tiffany together and take over because Joy does in fact have HIV and she dies from it eventually. So yeah, that's the biggest difference between the miniseries and the book. I can't even, all of that just took so much to explain. I don't really have much time left to go into depth about the actual storyline. So as you can probably tell, this was written in the 90s, and it is very, 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 there is another major difference that I need to talk about. So Thomas and Dominic's mother adored her father, absolutely adored her father. And he wrote his life story. It's in Italian, so she was never able to read it. So before she dies of cancer towards the beginning of the book, miniseries, he decides to get it translated to give it to her so that she can read it before she dies. There is an issue with the woman that he hired to translate the manuscript, and she goes over to his house and tries to sleep with him. He says no, and she leaves, and he never sees her again. Or so he thinks, until about 2 years later, she shows up again as her fiance happens to be in the same hospital room that Dominic is in after he falls off the roof. And she says, hey, yes, sorry, I finished translating it. I don't think you want to read it because this person is awful, but you don't need to pay me for the rest. Just what you've paid me so far works. And I think that's fair considering I almost didn't give this to you. All right, bye. So he reads it. The episode in which he reads it, it's just one episode or half of an episode. And then, so that's really all it needs. And this manuscript goes on forever. This book within a book goes on forever in the book. It just goes on and on. I just wanted it to end and it wouldn't end. So one thing I want to clarify about me, I personally hate the book within a book concept. I don't mind it if it's a short, Harry Potter, The Tale of the Three Brothers. That was technically a story within a story. That was fine because it was a short story within the book and I didn't feel like it took away from the pacing of it. So something like that doesn't bother me. But this one, where it just went chapter after chapter, it went on for several chapters, but it did not take up the full chapter. It would be half the chapter would be this manuscript and then him discussing what he read with his therapist, or half the chapter and then some other thing that's going on in his life. But it just went on so long. I felt like it was never gonna end. And that something like that is when it really starts to bug me, because it's I don't care about the events of the book within the book. To me, I feel like a lot of times that trope slows down the pacing of the main story that I am trying to read, and I want to focus on just that story. If it was just a half a chapter or a full chapter dedicated to this manuscript, I feel like that would have been fine. But I don't know. I want to say it dragged on for 5 to 6 chapters, maybe more than that. It just went on. No, it had to have been more than that, because I was I would finish a chapter and then I'd be we're not even done. I remember the miniseries when the book ended and we haven't even reached that point. Okay. Yes. So it just went on and on and on. And then, to make matters worse, within the book, there's another story that gets told by the best friend. Okay, so again, this book within a book is the story of his grandfather. And his grandfather is an asshole. He's an asshole. He ends up going to Brooklyn and buys his wife, because that's how things happened back then, and he brings her to Connecticut, and she brings the best friend. Well, and in the miniseries they're not best friends, they're related, but in the book, it turns out that they're best friends. So not only do we have a book within the book, this best friend ends up telling her own story about the truth about who they are, because he guesses that they lied about their identity, and she's you're right, here's the actual story of who we are. So we have a story within the book, and oh my gosh, it just slowed it down. This was the part that I was really we don't need this. Cut this, please cut this. I don't care about the actual identity. I don't care I just don't care. I don't care. Please just let me move forward with the story about Dominic and Thomas. That is what I care about. And this definitely went more than 6 chapters, maybe 10 or 11, maybe even more. I don't know. I did not keep track, but it definitely it was definitely more than 6 chapters. So we have the book within a book already slowing the pacing down. And then we add another story on top of that within this. So it really, really, really slowed down the pacing a lot. And that's when it started to lose me. There was some parts, some backstory moments that I was like, I feel like this can be trimmed, but it didn't necessarily lose my attention. Once we got to this part, I was like, when is this going to end? Especially because in the miniseries, like, he arrives to America. He only has one brother in the miniseries, but in the book he has two. One of them, and like in the miniseries, the two brothers' personalities get merged into the one brother. So yeah, and I actually don't think I need to describe more than that. You just need to know that there is a book within a book, and within that book, within a book, there is a story. If that made no sense, yeah, imagine trying to read that. And anyway, yes, so that was just really annoying and frustrating for me. Otherwise, the pacing of it, not the pacing, the adaptation was faithful to the book, and the ways in which it wasn't faithful, I felt like it definitely helped move the story forward, other than Ralph not being as three-dimensional as he is in the book. That's really my only gripe with the adaptation. That being said, I'm mainly going to talk about Mark Ruffalo, because not that everyone else in the adaptation does a bad job. They don't. Everyone is wonderful. But I mean, Mark Ruffalo is not only in he not only the star of the show, he plays two different characters. He plays Dominic and he plays Thomas. So what they did is they filmed all of Dominic's, every single scene with Dominic in it. They filmed all of those first, and then they took a 6-week hiatus so that Mark Ruffalo could put on weight to then play Thomas, and then they went back and filmed all of Thomas's sequences. So I thought that was really fascinating. And like I said, everyone was great. I don't think there was anyone that stuck out to me as like, why would you go with that? I don't know. I feel like that character doesn't really fit. But obviously the standout performance to me was Mark Ruffalo, and really there's no there's no way to not talk about him. He's great. He was fantastic. Mark Ruffalo is already a fantastic actor, and I loved him. He was incredible. And his performance, especially, like, his performance as Dominic was great, but his performance as Thomas especially was just, you feel so bad for him, and you feel like this tenderness toward him, because there's like this almost childlike quality that he brought to the portrayal of Thomas. And it's just, there are a lot of heartbreaking moments in this series, and you feel every single one. I'm also going to give a shout out to Philip Ettinger, who's only in 2 episodes, but he does play teenage / college age Dominic. And again, he plays both Dominic and Thomas. And I just want to say, looks wise, I don't feel like he looks like Mark Ruffalo, but I believed that he was the younger version of Mark Ruffalo. There was also like this moment that happens. There's a lot of flashbacks also to when they're like kids, like 8-year-old kids, 9 years old. The little boys they got for that were great as well. But I feel like 8 years old is enough of a gap where it's like, you don't need to like capture all the mannerisms of adult Mark Ruffalo. But Philip Ettinger, wow. He said, looks wise, I don't feel like he looks like Mark Ruffalo, but I fully believed that this teenage college age Dominic totally grew up to be Mark Ruffalo. Like, he got the cadence down of the way Mark Ruffalo talks. He got like the little Mark Ruffalo mannerisms down. It was very uncanny in that respect. Like I said, not so much in looks, but I fully believed. It was like, I can see why you got cast, because he nailed it. Like, he got that down. So I did want to give a shout out to him. The rest of the ensemble is great. We have Imogen Poots as Joy, as I mentioned. Archie Punjabi as Dr. Patel. So one thing I do want to say about Dr. Patel, she is of Indian descent. And as I was kind of mentioning earlier, but then I forgot, this is dated. There are definite, like, you can tell that this was written in the 90s. There's just some things that's like, ooh, like, this is definitely kind of stereotypical and it like almost inappropriate kind of. It's like, this is definitely written in the 90s. Like, this, certain things are not aging well. And Dr. Patel isn't necessarily a bad character per se in the book. She's just a very stereotypical Indian woman. You know, she's wears saris to work, and there's really no other reason for her to wear a sari other than, oh, she's Indian, so Indians wear sari, so let's put her in a sari. So like little things like that. Like I said, the kind of almost predatory nature of the characters who end up getting passing on HIV, I should say. There's a lot of stereotypes that out there about gay men as it is, and I don't feel like this book aided those stereotypes in any shape, way, or form. We have Catherine Hahn as Dessa, who is also fantastic. So yeah, everyone was fantastic, but I really it's hard not to talk about Mark Ruffalo, since he is playing two characters, and he plays one who, in my opinion, I don't know much about schizophrenia, but I thought maybe someone who knows more about schizophrenia would disagree, but I feel like it was a very truthful performance. I don't feel like it was caricature-y. So that being said, I rated I Know This Much Is True, the book, 3 stars, and I rated I Know This Much Is True, the miniseries, 4 stars, which means the miniseries is better. And you know what? The miniseries was just acting was great from everyone. Like you said, my only gripe with it really is Ralph Drinkwater's not as fleshed out of a character as he can be. But otherwise, Dessa and Dominic find their way back to each other in the miniseries in a way that's a little bit different than they do in the book. They don't end up adopting Joy's daughter, like I said, after he reveals that he can't possibly be the father. That's the last we see of her. So yeah, I feel the downfall of the book is for sure that it needed an editor, and the ultimate downfall is that book within a book, or should I say that story within a book. Within a book. It's just the book within a book. Ugh, I really do not like that trope. So had the book been edited down a lot, and there was a lot of really impactful moments in the book. It starts off really, you start off on this wild ride, and so you come out running from the gate. So to have it go down when it does go down, so your expectations are high, and as it proceeds, it doesn't always meet that. It gets slowed down a lot by certain aspects of it, which is a shame, because I do feel like if we lost a good 400 of those pages, at least 450 of those pages, I feel like the book would be a lot more solid. And I feel like I would have been able to rate that one 4 stars, and it would have been a tie with maybe one slightly edging out the other. But no, in this case, I think the miniseries is a clear winner. The book is great, and I hesitate to say that you should skip it. I don't know, because I did like it. It's just those issues that I talked about that just really ruin it for me. So I don't know. I don't feel confident saying you can definitely skip the book. I would recommend the TV series over the book for sure if you feel like you only want to do one or the other. I hesitate to say you can skip the book completely, because I don't feel that way. It's just those issues that really irked me. There's going to be moments in which you can just skim read and get back to the more exciting parts, and honestly you won't have missed much. Yeah. And you can watch it in conjunction with the miniseries, and if you feel like you missed something, you can watch the miniseries and you'll be all caught up with what's going on in the moment. So that is it. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Books versus Movies. I'm excited to welcome you to the next season. I'm going to call it the next season for now, and we will see if it stays as a season or if it'll just be record and release. And turns out the first season is just however long this season ended up being, and season 2 is just forever and always in perpetuity continuing on. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm really excited to announce the news and for the audio quality to get better. And thank you. I'll see you next time. I'll see you in the new season. Bye.